Why people leave the church. It's a really up type sermon, sounds like, doesn't it? Well, hopefully it will be before it's all over. I want to talk about why people leave the church, and I want to talk about it, guess why? Because people leave the church. They do it all the time. So I want to start by doing some statistics, shall we? Some statistics. And recent statistics on declining church attendance, but I want to do it on denominational churches, Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, denominational churches, because we have some statistics about those groups by some different research groups. The Pew Research Center, I found that the research that I was looking for only went to 20, 21, 22, they didn't have for 23, 24, obviously. But some pretty good trends that I saw. So Pew research from 21, 22, Pew has tracked a continued decrease in the share of Americans who identify as Christians, and when I use that term generically, Christians. In 2009, approximately 77% of US adults identified as Christians. By 2021, that figure had fallen closer to 63%, from 77 to 63% in just a few years. During the same period, those people identifying as religious nuns, I don't mean nuns like in the Catholic Church, I mean nuns, none. I'm nothing. I don't belong to anything. I'm not of a particular religion. I'm not agnostic. I'm not atheist. I'm a nun. That particular group rose from 17% to 29%. Imagine 29% of those who have an opinion on religion say they don't belong to anything, 29%. Frequent church attendance, weekly or nearly weekly, continues to decline, especially, and this is important, especially among younger adults. Another poll, because I consulted several, researched several, this is Gallup, the Gallup organization. Gallup reported that for the first time in 80 years, it's been tracking church membership for 80 years, first time in 80 years, membership in houses of worship, that's everybody, churches, synagogues, mosques, for the first time, total attendance dropped below 50% in 2020 and 2021. Below 50% for the first time in 80 years. Although this figure encompasses multiple different types of religions, the decline is strongly influenced by reduced Christian church membership, given that Christianity is still the largest religious affiliation in the United States. And don't get me wrong, I'm using the word generically, those who claim that they are Christians, still the largest group in the United States. Then another research group that does a lot of research in religious matters here in the United States, the Barna Group, various studies. A Barna study found that around 64% of American who are between the ages of 18 and 29 years old, who grew up in a church, had withdrawn from church involvement for an extended period, citing reasons like disillusionment or disagreement with church teaching. 64% of young people, 18 to 29, fall away from church. 69%. That's a big group. Barna also identified a growing category of what they call disengaged Christians. Those are people who still self-identify as Christians, and if someone said to them at the hospital, for example, they're filling out the form, and what religion are you? They put Christian down, but they don't go to church. They don't attend church. They go to church for a wedding, maybe Christmas time or something like that. A large growing category of people who find that it's good enough to just call yourself a Christian without having any kind of involvement in a church. Again, this is not my opinion, this is just research, what the people are finding out as they do research. Common reasons that denominational believers stop attending church, according to these studies. I'm still using the research here, and I'm still talking about denominational groups. Common reasons that they found. Disillusionment. Disillusionment with institutionalized religion. For example, high-profile scandals in the church. Cases of abuse. I mean, let's face it, if you're Catholic and you're in the paper and you're reading that 29 priests have been charged with abusing children in a particular area, that's pretty discouraging if you're a Catholic. If you're a Catholic, I'm not mentioning anything about doctrine or position, I'm just saying if you're a Catholic person and that's how you go to church and you find out that a whole bunch of clergymen have been accused of abusing children, that's not a very encouraging thing for your faith. Also, financial transparency issues. Some people leave the church after feeling church funds have been misused or not transparently managed. The minister has just bought a new 747. Another reason, disagreement on social or political issues. Increasingly, some congregations are perceived as overly politicized. Congregants who disagree with the church's stance on topics such as immigration, gay rights, or racial justice, members feel alienated. When the bishop of a particular denomination announces that the new bishop is a gay woman, that has an effect on the membership. There may be some in the audience who applaud, but there may be others who sit quietly and their response is simply to stop coming. Another reason for decrease in church attendance in the denominational world. Also, generational differences. Younger Christians might feel that traditional stances on social issues don't align with their views, prompting them to leave or to disengage with the church. They go to the church and they hear one thing, then they go to the university and they hear something else. The church teaches about creation. When they go to the college, their professor is talking to them about evolution. And of course, they're confused, and that confusion leads to discouragement. Discouragement leads to disengagement, and they leave the church. Another reason cited. Again, this is all in the research, okay? Theological questions. Many Christians, especially younger believers, report going through phases of faith deconstruction, questioning core doctrines. They may feel that they can't safely explore doubts within a church context. Some find it easier to pursue spirituality individually rather than conform to organized religious structures or formal worship services. You know, people who say, well, my religion is I'm out in the, I go hunting. I'm in nature. I'm with the nature, I'm with the trees, I'm with the sun, I'm with the sky, I'm with God. That's their religion. In other words, they're making up their own religion, but that's more and more common these days. And people are feeling quite satisfied with it. Very quickly, negative personal experiences. Congregants who experience judgment or exclusion or personal conflict within the church, they feel unwelcome due to life choices. Somebody's 17-year-old son comes into the church building with a purple mohawk all of a sudden and feels judged and is unhappy and stops coming to, it happens all the time. Burnout, another reason I thought that was very interesting. Burnout, volunteers or staff who feel overburdened by church demands and responsibilities, sometimes they just burn out, and instead of getting help or talking it through and so on and so forth, they just step back. And they say, well, I'll step back for a couple of weeks, and a couple of weeks turns into a couple of months, and a couple of months turns into forever. Another reason why people leave in denominational groups. Another reason, practical and lifestyle factors. modern work schedules, family commitments, personal activities, all of that challenge can make attendance on a weekly basis, on a regular basis, quite challenging. We live near the base, near Tinker Air Force Base, and our son William works there, and he tells me the various shifts that he's on. I don't know how he does it. I mean, he says, yeah, I got to be there at 3:30 in the morning. I don't know about you, but I don't know how long I'd last if I had to work from 3:30 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon or whatever it is, the shift he's on sometimes. So that takes a load off people. You may not feel like coming to church on a Wednesday that you've worked that kind of shift, and there's all kinds of other things pulling at us. And then online alternative. Since COVID, more people access spiritual content online. We stream our services. We have, what is it, 3,000 subscribers or something like that. We have a pretty healthy subscriber base to our Choctaw channel. And there are always people who are watching services online. Usually it's because they're ill or they can't get out, they're shut-ins, but there are some people who exclusively, their only interaction with church is they watch church online, period. They don't go to church anymore. That's a new phenomenon that's taking place. And then of course, a cultural emphasis on individualism and self-discovery can lead people away from traditional church structures and begin to adopt a more eclectic spiritual practice, what I call modern syncretism. Syncretism is when you take an idea over here, a philosophy over here, a religious practice over there, a religious tradition from this group, and you kind of mix it all together and you make your own, you syncretize, you bring together. But people are doing that more and more today. They're taking a little bit from everywhere and they're making up their own religion. Another reason. Some broader observations here, and I'm coming to the end of the research part. Data suggests that Generation Z and millennials are less likely to attend church regularly compared to older generations. I think we know that. Partly due to cultural shifts and partly because of skepticism regarding institutional religion. They don't trust church. They don't trust church because they see bad things that are taking place in various churches, scandals, whatever. Some preacher runs off with his secretary, or some very famous preacher does something very bad, and that creates discouragement among individuals, especially young people. Also, regional variations. Church attendance remains more stable in certain regions, of course, in the US South, the Bible Belt, but it has fallen much more dramatically in urban areas and coastal regions. Of course, New York, California, church attendance there is declining much faster, at a much faster rate than it is declining in central United States where we live. And then of course the post-pandemic realignment. The COVID pandemic disrupted traditional church attendance patterns. While some congregations returned, others never did. Simultaneously, many churches have only increased their online presence to adapt. Some churches lost more than half of their members during COVID, and so they switched to online services and they emphasized online services, so now they're online churches. Again, this is in the denominational area. I'll talk about us in a second here. Concluding thoughts. Church attendance trends are multifaceted, reflecting personal experiences, cultural shifts, political polarization, and practical lifestyle considerations. While the decline in attendance among denominational churches is well documented, especially among younger demographics, there are also shifts in how people practice their faith, such as attending online services, as I said, or joining smaller home groups, home churches, or parachurch ministries. In other words, church attendance is being replaced in many instances by belonging to para-church organizations, soup kitchens, helping the poor, building houses for families who are destitute, and so on and so forth. This type of activity replaced, that's my church. My church is on Thursday night, we go and we help in the soup line, and we give out clothing. I'm doing a good work. That's my new church. So those are some of the trends that are taking place in the denominational world. These are, as I say, explanations given for the drop in attendance and the engagement in the denominational churches. And the drop is very rapid. It's a very alarming thing for those who study that. Okay, so that's the denominational world, little research there to help you understand what's going on there. Let's talk about people who leave Restorationist churches. And I hope everybody understands when I say Restorationist churches who I'm talking about. We should anyways. When I talk about Restorationist churches, I'm talking about the churches that came forth from the Restoration movement of the 18th and 19th centuries, which we now refer to as churches of Christ. Now there are other church groups that claim this historical source, churches like the Christian churches, as they are called, or Disciples of Christ churches. However, it is the churches of Christ that have maintained the original principles of this movement, which sought to do away with whatever religious practices or doctrines that were not expressly taught or demonstrated in the New Testament, and who use only the New Testament as the authority and guide for the church's organization, practice, and teaching. If somebody says, "What church do you go to?" and you say, "Well, I go to the Choctaw Church of Christ," and they say to you, "What kind of church is that?" I've just given you the answer to that question. We're a Restorationist church. What type of Restorationist church? We're mainline. No reason to be ashamed of that idea. Here at the Church of Christ, we are one of these Restoration churches that continue to pursue these goals in all that we teach and in all that we do, and we make no apologies for that. I don't apologize to anyone for being a member of a Restorationist church. I don't apologize to anyone for being a member of the Church of Christ, a mainline Church of Christ. What are we trying to do? We're trying to restore New Testament Christianity. We're trying to practice Christianity as it was practiced in the New Testament. And how do we do that? Well, we follow carefully the teachings of the New Testament and put those into practice in our everyday lives. That's what we're doing. That's who we are. We don't have to be ashamed of that. We don't have to make an excuse for that. That's a legitimate goal. That's a terrific goal to have religiously. Now, this being said, we are also affected by the society around us, and as a consequence, we also lose members on a regular basis. At times, they leave for some of the reasons already mentioned. However, as a minister of the church for over 40 years, I have seen other reasons people abandon the church that are not mentioned in these studies. And I'd like to share these with you, as well as ways that we can use to prevent the loss of precious souls for whom Christ died. So I'll ask the question again. So, why do people leave the Church of Christ? That's a different question. Why do people leave our congregation? We know they do, let's face it. People we've seen here last year, not here anymore for various reasons. So a couple of answers. First, the normal cycle for growth. It is normal for congregations to gain and then lose members on a regular basis. There's nothing unnatural about that. It's just part of life. It's part of spiritual life. Throughout the year, people are naturally added to the church in a variety of ways. Some people are added through the church, through baptism. Acts chapter 2, verse 47, the Lord added daily those who are being saved. Some people return to the church after an absence because of some sinfulness or just neglect or whatever, and they come back and they're restored to the church, and all of a sudden, whoa, that person who wasn't there for 2 years is now back in the pew and serving and taking communion and so on and so forth. Some are already Christians, but they decide to identify with this congregation because of a recent move into our community, or because they prefer to be part of this congregation for their own family and their own spiritual development. Happens all the time. Somebody's living in Edmond and they move over here to Choctaw. They're not going to drive out to Edmond. They decide, hey, this is a good congregation. I'm going to place membership, or I'm going to identify. There's always a little debate about that, but we understand what it is. They're going to start coming here regularly. So all of a sudden, a family that wasn't here before is now here. We count them among us. That's how churches grow. They're baptized, they're restored, they're added, they place membership. Normal cycle of growth, normal type thing. However, people also leave the church, and I'd like to spend a little bit of time discussing this problem and maybe some solution. So, reasons for church decline. Churches don't die all at once like they are, they're firebombed or something. That's one way in a war. Things and people and churches expire a bit at a time. I've seen churches die. I've actually seen them just wither down to nothing and then sell the building, and that's it. I've seen that happen. For example, a key donor passes away and no one replaces him or her or their gifts to the church. Someone who is generous in their giving to the church and has been generous over many, many years, and all of a sudden that person passes away, nobody steps up to replace what they have done. So that happens. Or an effective teacher retires and is not replaced. Or no one takes responsibility to scout and to train future leaders needed in various areas of congregational life, thinking that that's just going to happen all by itself, and it doesn't. Or the congregation doesn't invest in the professional and financial development of its staff. Companies do that. Schools do that. Government does that. But I've noticed a lot of times churches are not usually inclined to invest in the professional development of its own staff. Sometimes someone gets their feelings hurt for 100 different reasons or 100 different situations, and instead of talking it out with a brother or sister, they just quietly leave. No excuse given, no goodbye. One Sunday they're just gone, and many times no one takes the time to go after them. I've seen it here. A family here for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden they're not here anymore. They're just not here. You think they're on vacation, you think maybe somebody's sick, somebody may make a call, and you find out, they're worshiping over there. No excuse, no reason, nothing. The real reason is somebody said something, I don't know, they got crossways with somebody and it was just easier to disappear than to work it out. It's any number of things that chip away at a congregation's spiritual development. For example, the lack of quality preaching and teaching, or leadership that's not keeping up with the needs and the times that the congregation is going through. Happens all the time. Like many organizations, we become comfortable with the status quo, how things are done. We don't plan ahead. We simply repeat what's easiest, what's most familiar, and we do the parts of our jobs that require the least amount of effort. For example, it's easier to have a meeting to discuss a problem than to actually go out and get our hands dirty fixing the problem. So we meet, and maybe we agree to meet again to talk some more about the problem, and the problem never gets solved. You know, I showed you statistics that tracked the decline of denominational churches. I'd like to show you now some statistics from our own congregation here in Choctaw, statistics that I have gathered using the archive of weekly bulletins that go as far back as 1991. There are some that go back even further, but they're not constant enough. But I do have, I have access to records of our bulletins that go back that far back. I also had access to member directories that go back that far. These statistics provide the potential attendance for 6 key years from 1991 to 2024. Additionally, because we have membership rolls for these periods, I've also listed the number of people who are still members here at Choctaw from each of those years. So I'm going to show you the chart and just read it very quickly and then make some comments to put some meat on these bones. So here's the chart. The year 1991, the potential attendance. What's the potential attendance? That's if you open the directory for 1991 and you count every single family, every single kid in that family, and you have a total number of, I don't mean to say this in a disparaging way, but a total number of bodies, okay? No judgment call on who's mature, not mature, blah, blah, blah. It's just, these are all the families. If you count them all up, this is the total potential if everybody shows up. Mom, dad, grandpa, the kids, the baby, everybody's there. So 1991, the potential attendance, 405. Still attending. When I looked at the 2024 directory, and compared it to the 91 directory, there were still 52 people still here. I just want to do an experiment. If you were here in 1991, raise your hand. Stand up, please. Just first, I know you don't like to do this, but just stand up, if you still can. Okay, brothers and sisters, this is faithfulness. This is faithfulness right here. Thank you. Please sit. Since 1991, and you're probably saying it in your own mind. Well, I was here before 1991. Yeah, sure, but I mean, I've only got a record from 1991. Still 52. So very quickly, 1996, potential attendance, 436. Still attending, 76. The year 2000, potential attendance, 607. Still attending, 102. 2012, potential attendance, 472. Still attending, 172, 2022. Potential attendance, 369. Still attending, 252. 2024, potential attendance, 324. Still attending, 265. Now, a couple of things about this. That number 52 is less now, of course, because I wrote this lesson maybe a month and a half ago or something like that. Just had the chance to preach it today, but I wrote it a couple of months ago. And we had 52, and just in a couple of months, look at the dear blessed people that we lost. Wilma Walters, Jean, we've lost people. Even in the last couple of months, that number of 52 there has chopped down into the high 40s. Jean Ashford, yeah, that's who I was trying to remember. Ann Thompson, just a couple off the top of my head that we've lost. A few things about this chart to get it into context. In the early years, and I remember this, I was here not in 91, but I was here in 93. In the early years, we counted everybody who was in the directory, even if they were dead or they had moved away, they hadn't been to church in 2 years, you know what I'm saying? I mean, we counted everybody. We were counting, what is it, preacher count. We had a bad case of preacher count in those days. But we got better at it. We started cleaning up the directory. If somebody had moved, we got them out of the directory. If they had passed away, we got them out of the directory. We stopped counting people who weren't here to try to get it a little more accurate as the years went on. That's one thing. And then our peak point, if you notice it goes up, our peak point was just after we finished a major renovation in 1999. We had a big jump there. We added, Bob will probably correct me here, but 15,000 square feet, something like that. A huge amount of square feet. We redid the entire inside of the building and the outside of the building. It was quite a project, $1 million, knew everything. And the statistics and the research in those days said that if you did a thing like that, you could expect a 15% bump in attendance. I mean, just for having something new and bigger, you'd get a 15% bump in attendance. And we did a much bigger bump. It was closer to 20%. People were curious. And it was a time of tremendous growth in Choctaw. In those days, people were moving in, the schools were going up. It was just the perfect storm. The perfect storm of time, and the Lord blessed us, and we just took advantage of that. And then another stat that we need to understand, another thing that happened, COVID. We can't underestimate COVID. Tremendous, terrible thing that happened to everyone, of course. 2020, 2021. It affected the growth and stability of our congregation here. For over 2 years we suffered with the effects of that, which explains the drop in the potential attendance during that time, even up to this year. We calculate that we lost at least a third of our congregation, a third. Some died, some were sick, some were afraid to come back. There's still some people today are afraid to come back, to be in a public place because of this illness. Some went to other congregations, and some got into the habit of not coming to church. In Hebrews, when the Hebrew writer said, don't get into the habit of not coming to church. Yeah, it's a habit. People got into the habit of doing something else on Sunday morning and Sunday night, and they never came back. And we literally lost a third of our congregation. I mean, some congregations didn't survive. Some of our churches of Christ in Oklahoma City area, they didn't recover from it. They're down a half, 2/3. They're barely just making it nowadays. We, thankfully, we survived. And we thrived on it. We got better at it. I hate to always mention our Hal and I's ministry, but Bible Talk, COVID was the best thing that ever happened to Bible Talk. I mean, people were looking for stuff online, and lo and behold, we had plenty of stuff online, and we had tremendous growth because of that. And our congregation had a great advantage, and I have to give Hal credit for this. We were leaders in streaming online services. We were way ahead of everybody else in doing that. And so when COVID hit, we were ready for that. We had churches 3 times our size who were 10 years behind us and had to come to us to get information about how to stream online. So all those things worked to our advantage. And so what do these numbers show? Well, having been associated with this congregation, as I mentioned, since '93, I can give you now I'm getting to my opinion. So far it's just statistics. From here on in, and as I finish up, I give you my opinion as one who's witnessed a lot of these events over these years. First of all, people are continually added in both good and difficult years because the gospel is the power unto salvation. Whether it was COVID or no COVID, the power of salvation is still the gospel. Romans 1:16 is true whether COVID is in or out. It's always true. It's always true. The gospel works if we preach it, despite the condition of society, not because of it. Doesn't matter what the denominational people are doing. If we preach the gospel, people will respond to the gospel. Another opinion. People continually leave us no matter what we do. Doesn't matter what we do. Doesn't matter what the elders do. Doesn't matter what the deacons do. Doesn't matter what the preachers are preaching. People leave. They continually leave us no matter what we do. They die. They move for new jobs. They get married. They get divorced. They move to another city to be close to their grandkids. They retire and go to Florida. Do I hear any amens? Sometimes people leave because they have hurt feelings. Sometimes they leave because they sin. That's the most common reason. They sin, and they'd rather continue sinning than continue coming to church and hearing about needing to repent of their sin. Sometimes they fall away because they're lazy. Sometimes they seek a more spiritual attitude somewhere else. Sometimes they want better Bible teaching. I mean, I've heard all of these excuses. I've heard them all. Some desire training and greater responsibility, but are overlooked. You know, some people have, put me in, coach, put me in, let me play, coach. And they never get their chance to get into the game and get on the field and play and make a difference. Nobody wants to train them. Nobody wants to mentor them. Nobody wants to give them a chance. So they go somewhere else. Or they go where they feel that their spiritual and emotional needs will be met. You know, sometimes somebody loses a loved one or goes through a bad patch, or somebody has surgery or a long-term illness, and nobody calls. Nobody sends a card. And nobody visits. They feel like a sheep without a shepherd. Resentment rises, and then they search for a place where they can feel loved or cared for. I think more people come to us to feel loved and cared for than go to somewhere else to feel love or care for. But it's happened that people have left here because they slipped through the cracks somehow. Conclusions. What can we draw from these facts? Well, it's a cycle. The numbers show us that growth and loss are cycles that follow each other depending on leadership, ability to adapt, the willingness of the members to be faithful and to serve, no matter what. Are you upset with the elders because they did something you didn't like? What are you going to do about that? Are you going to quit? Are you going to grumble forever? Or are you going to persevere? It's a cycle that all congregations of the church go through. A small check of surrounding congregations of the Lord's church shows that they too have lost approximately a third of their congregation in the last couple of years. The difference is that some of these churches have not turned the corner yet, but we have. Thanks be to God. And leaving rarely provides all the things that people are hoping to find. If some people leave for a livelier worship service, well then they miss the focus on Bible teaching for which we are known, because after all, believe it or not, we are still the Bible people. We're still those people. Those who leave eventually realize that there are as many immature, annoying people and preaching and teaching that they don't like in their new church as there was in the one that they left. There's a guy who wrote a book, apologies, I forgot the name, but the book I remember is called Well-Meaning Dragons. Well-Meaning Dragons. And it's a book, it's not even written by a member of a Restorationist church, it's written by a Methodist. And what he writes is about the archetype characters that are found in every church that he's ever worked in. There's always this type and that type and this type and that type, and it doesn't matter where you go, they're always there. And the same problems exist in every congregation. I'm in a 100-member church, but I'm going to go to a 1,000-member church to solve all these problems, and they find out that the 1,000-member church has exactly the same problems. They just have a bigger challenge in trying to resolve them. And then at times, people see that their leaving simply drove one more nail in the failure of the struggling church that they left, which eventually closes down because, well, eventually everybody leaves. Some may have or are experiencing some of these issues and frustrations that I'm mentioning to you. I'm not scolding you. This is not a harangue. I'm venting on your part. I get the privilege of speaking from time to time. Marty's always been very generous with his pulpit. So it's easy to go, to leave behind all the perceived problems, and much harder to stay at times. Now, I'm not talking here about necessary departures, for work or school or caring for parents. We all know, these are right reasons to move on. So I'd like to finish my lesson this morning by stating some of the things that make you stay when you're angry, when you're disappointed, when you're resentful, or you're just plain bored, because that happens too. You get bored. You want to go somewhere to be stimulated. I want to give you some reasons to stay. Here they are. Reason number 1. Realize that God is here. God can minister to you from here because this congregation confesses Christ as Savior and Lord, and the majority of the people here have the Spirit dwelling in them. The Word of God is preached, repentant believers are immersed, and we are waiting for the glorious return of Jesus, who will transform us into glorious heavenly beings in the twinkle of an eye when He comes to raise the dead at the end of the world. That's who we are. Some places may be bigger or smaller, flashier, or have a basketball court, but if your desire is to go to heaven, you can do it from here, because this is the desire of every man and woman in this place. When Jesus returns, He will not be searching for the biggest or the flashiest, for the most well-staffed and modern church. He'll be looking for the faithful church. And without boasting other than in the Lord, the Choctaw congregation, aside from its weaknesses and faults, continues to claim and strives to be a faithful New Testament church, nothing more or nothing less, and that is enough. And for this reason, we are confident that God is among us here at Choctaw. That's not a boast, that's a reality. Another suggestion to help you stay. Keep your life simple, will you? In the parable of the soils, Jesus said, "And others are the ones on whom seed was sown among the thorns, and these are the ones who have heard the word, but the worries of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and the desires for other things enter in and choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful." In other words, they leave the church. Most people fall away from the church not for sinful behavior. No, they fall away because they get too busy. Babies come along. Baseball comes along. Promotions are earned. Buying a cottage at the lake. We have new friends. I've got to do overtime. We've joined a club of some kind. Go on and on and on and on. These things that I've just mentioned, they cost money. They take time. They take attention as well as complicate our schedules. One of the first things to go in a life like this is church attendance. First to go is usually Sunday nights. And then Wednesday night follows. Why? Because so many other things are scheduled right at that midweek spot. Finally, we start skipping Sunday mornings because, well, the championship game is on Sunday and I'm not going to miss playing in the championship game, am I? Or the only nice day to play golf or whatever you do is Sunday morning. Just fill in the blank with your excuse. Complicating our lives with good things that crowd out the important things. I got to repeat that, okay? Complicating our lives with good things that crowd out the important things of God is the world's way of separating us from the church. If you want to avoid this, brothers and sisters, keep your life simple. Make sure you don't trade spiritual priorities for worldly demands. You can't claim faithfulness to Christ by punching in for services at Christmas time or somebody's wedding or funeral. Believe me, God sees the difference, even if you don't. And if you want to stay, really, keep the kingdom first. When Lise and I were first converted, we had very little knowledge of the Bible. We grew up Catholic, so I was converted when I was 30. At 30 years of age, new Christian, I had never been to Bible school, never been to VBS, never been to a Bible camp, never belonged to a youth group, never had a home Bible study, never. These were not things that I knew about, neither did Lise. We didn't grow up in that environment. However, we had a little bit of knowledge of the New Testament, and we had one thing that guided and we were newly married. We had one thing that guided us early on, and that was Matthew 6:33, where Jesus said, "But seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you." That was our key. That was the thing that we used to unlock decisions or to decide things. We always tested it against that. This was our gauge for doing things or not doing things. Things that weren't bad, just ordinary things that we were pressured to get involved in at work or family. We'd ask ourselves, is doing this going to help us seek the kingdom first? And we talk about it, and if we decided that it was not going to help us do that, we didn't do it. I remember our family deciding one day that from now on, all birthdays and family dinners were to be held on Sundays. Now, Lisa's family lived 50 miles away from our home, which would mean every time there was a special occasion, we'd have to miss services. Although this was meant to draw our family together, it was not helping us to seek the kingdom first. So we politely refused the invites until they changed the tradition to Saturdays instead of Sundays. I remember they weren't happy about that. But if they wanted us there, they had to have us there on Saturday, because the kingdom business was a priority on Sunday. Another example of kingdom first living, one of the hardest things that I ever had to tell Paul, our other son, our eldest son, who was at the time a gifted athlete, was that he would not be allowed to play with the hockey travel team. There was a hockey team who played locally, but there was a travel team who was the superior team that played in the top league. And the reason he was not allowed to play on that team was because all of their away games were played on Sundays. They would leave Saturday, they would play Sunday morning, they would come back Saturday night. Well, you know, he was young. He was a great prospect as a hockey player, but this schedule would not help him seek the kingdom first. Today, he's happy that we helped him maintain that direction, which now fully lives in his wife Rachel and their 3 children. Keeping the kingdom first is easy to understand, it's hard to do, but believe me, brothers and sisters, it's worth it in the end. Just ask the people who have been here since 1991. Finally, if you want to stay, forgive. Forgive. Jesus explained to Peter that in the kingdom, which is the church, the standard for forgiveness is our go-to position when we're offended. When we're offended, we have 10 things we can do. We can be resentful, we can be angry, we can burn, we can boil, we can get angry, we can fight, we can be resentful, we can gossip, we can, there are all these things when we're offended, or we can just forgive. And in the church, the go-to position always when we're offended is that we forgive, always. So many people leave one congregation for another because of hurt feelings that receive no apology, or unfair treatment that receives no compensation, or achievement that doesn't, underachievement that doesn't improve. And our response is to leave without any sense of closure. Do we not realize that forgiveness is closure? Forgiveness transfers the burden of hurt and resentment, as well as the desire for justice, to God, who will in time judge properly. You cannot be a faithful and productive member of this or any congregation if your default position for sticks and stones that come your way is not forgiveness. In other words, you give up the right to collect your rightful compensation due to insult or unfairness or injury or neglect or annoyance, and you pass that debt along to God for payment. In still other words, you who have hurt me somehow, you don't owe me anything anymore. I've passed your debt on to God in the same way that I've passed along my own sins to Jesus on the cross. In the same way, I hope you have passed my own sins against you to God as well. If forgiveness is our go-to position, then we are free to love again. And as God says to Peter, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Marty always says, oh, I wish there was another verse, or I wish there was a little bit more. And for this passage here, I wish there were just a few more words, and it would say, above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins in the church. If we just forgave each other, nobody would leave. So, as we do for each service here, I invite you who have not yet confessed your faith in Jesus and repented of your sins and been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins and received the indwelling of the Spirit, I encourage you not to delay and save your soul today, so that you may have the blessed peace of mind that comes with God's salvation and truly become part of this church. I also invite those who need prayer to be stronger in Christ, who need to be able, to say to God, please help me to be able to forgive. Help me to do that. Those who need His help to make the kingdom a priority in their lives. And those who want to break free from anger and disappointment and cynicism by making forgiveness your go-to position in all your relationships with your brothers, your sisters, your spouses, your children, as well as those that you work with. If you need prayer to do that, then come. The church will pray for you. And then finally, if the church can serve you in any way, come forward now as we stand and as we sing our song of encouragement.